Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar today for Impact. I'll introduce myself to start with. So my name is Carlin Summers. I'm a client solutions consultant with Amberjack. I have been with the company for coming up to 4 years now. I started out life with Amberjack as a client partner, so I worked on sort of the delivery of the campaigns that we have with our clients, and then made the move across to our consulting solutions team. So I work with organizations to understand what some of their challenges are and how across our various offerings we're able to kind of support them to come up with solutions to help them not only to kind of overcome their challenges in the immediate future, but also kind of on a long-term basis. So today I'll be taking you through a demonstration of Impact. So Impact is our paperless assessment center tool. It was initially designed as a kind of a face-to-face paperless tool, but given sort of what's happening in the world at the moment with the coronavirus crisis, we've had a look at the technology and through examples of certainly clients that currently use it, the need to be able to deliver assessment centres virtually has become exceptionally important, if not vital. And so we have looked at how assessment centres can be delivered virtually using this tool. So I'll take you through and give you examples as we go through as some of how you can adapt the use of this tool to be able to deliver an assessment centre virtually. As we go through, if you have any questions, please do type them in. I'll keep an eye on the questions box, but I'll also pause occasionally throughout just to give you an opportunity to ask questions. So there are 4 main areas of impact, so I'll take you through each area, one of them being the candidate area. There's a facilitator area, an assessor area, as well as the administrator area. So I'll take you through what we call kind of the front-facing sections first. So that's the candidate, facilitator, and assessor, and then we'll finish on the admin side. It's always helpful, I think, to sometimes see how it looks and what it does first before you look at how that gets set up. So let's start. So this view that you see at the moment, so this is the assessor view, or what you would see as the either assessor or facilitator or administrator to log in. This particular access to be able to be all 3 of those categories, but what you can do is you can select and give somebody either only assessor access, only facilitator access, only admin access, or a combination of all 3, depending on what you want those people to be able to see and access. Administrators are the only ones that are able to access candidate data, so that's normally the name and the email address and the scores. Facilitators would only ever see candidate names, and the same goes with assessors. They'll only ever see kind of candidate names. So if we move across to the facilitator view, look at that for kind of starting the assessment centre or starting the activities throughout. So the facilitator will see a list of assessment centres that they've been assigned to facilitate, and they'll be taken through to what is fundamentally a fairly straightforward sort of area for them. So this is really designed to be the message centre. You can see that candidates are broken into kind of 2 schedules. So we've divided candidates up by location. It might be that you want to just call them Schedule 1, Schedule 2, where you've got candidates who are doing different activities at the same time. It might be that you want to divide candidates up by business area. So it might be that some are applying for HR and some are applying for IT as a function, but actually you can run those assessment centres concurrently, and all candidates can attend on the same assessment centre and do different activities with different requirements and criteria and resources all at the same time. So as a facilitator, I can look at my candidate list and I can see who's online. So I can see here I've got these 2 candidates online in Schedule 1, and I can see these 2 candidates are online in Schedule 2. So this is really handy, so you know, especially if you're doing a virtual assessment centre, you know who's logged in or who hasn't. So you know whether or not to kind of wait, or you might need to contact those candidates directly if they're kind of running a little bit late or they may be struggling with tech. But you can always check that. So fundamentally, it is a pretty simple system from a facilitator perspective. You can either send candidates ad hoc messages, so there's sort of free text in there, and you can attach files or add links. Alternatively, you can use what you set up prior to the assessment centre day as your message templates. So it might be that you want to open up the assessment centre with a welcome message. So you just select your welcome message, that will automatically be populated in there. You can then amend anything if you want to change any of the details in that message, but it just saves time. What you can see here is we've actually already preloaded a link here. So particularly for your virtual assessment centres, what you can do is you can pre-record like a welcome message. So you can create that link here and candidates can watch that welcome message as a starter. So some of the other things that you can do as well here is when you're going to start an exercise. So the exercise would normally be started by sending the information that you need to send to the candidate. So if we use the group exercise as an example, if I go back to message templates, if we use the group exercise as an example, I can select that there. If you have multiple messages that you need to send to candidates throughout an exercise, so again, this group exercise is a really good example where it might be that you want to send some defamiliarization information sort of halfway through, or it might be that you have assigned roles for candidates. So you might have candidate 1 would receive a specific message with attachments and candidate 2 would receive a specific message with attachments. What you can do is you can filter, so you have group exercise, and then you're then only sort of able to choose from those ones that are related to that particular activity. So it just makes it a little bit easier for the facilitator to choose what they're going to be sending out. So you select that. You can see here that we've got an attachment here. So this is a Word document. So that's information for the candidate. And we've also got a Zoom link here. So that's where the virtual side of it comes into it. So candidates will receive that Zoom link and then they can click on it. Now, Impact doesn't have any kind of built-in sort of, I guess, collaboration or video tools or anything like that. So it's really flexible to allow you to use whatever technology works for you. I know some organizations can't use Zoom, some can't use Teams, that kind of things. So it allows you to be able to kind of manage that side of it and be able to deliver on whatever platform you need to be able to do kind of that video side of things. So once that's done, all you do is you select which candidates you're going to send the message to. So I might want to send that to all candidates, in which case I click on all candidates. That's if everybody's doing that exercise at the same time. It might be that I want only this group of candidates to do it, so I just click on that group. Or it might be that I want to send a message to an individual candidate, so I can just send it to that particular candidate. And then you just click on send, and then that gets sent through the candidate. Fundamentally, that's basically it from a facilitator side of things. So it's designed to be pretty straightforward. Doesn't need much training or anything like that. You can certainly go through it with a facilitator if it's their first time on the morning of, and it's pretty easy to pick up. So just on that, I'll throw it out if there are any questions so far. No. Okay. I'll move on, but if you do have any questions, please feel free to send them in. So what I'll do now is I'll move across to the candidate view. So candidates kind of get their own area. Candidates will be sent a URL and they can log in. So ordinarily what you would do is set up the candidate access, and it would be their name and email address. So the candidates would just log in with their email address, and it's usually, well, our recommendation is what they've used to submit their application with. If you wanted to kind of reduce the amount of personally identifiable information kept on this system, which at the moment is only a name and an email address, you might decide to allocate generic email addresses. So it might be that you want to call this candidate at Assessment Centre 1 or candidate 2 at Assessment Centre. So you can have it either way. It's just about making sure that the candidate knows which login they have. So candidates log in, they don't require a password at this point. What you can see here as well, which will only ever show up to probably about, I don't know, 1 or 2% of candidates. But I've kept it in this demonstration just to show you an example. So a use case for this part would be that a candidate might go, for example, to one assessment centre. Potentially they have to withdraw halfway through, they might be ill or need to leave for whatever reason and not be able to complete it, but you want to keep their scores. So you then want to re-invite them to kind of complete them and give them an opportunity. So what this would do is it effectively says that a candidate is live across 2 different assessment centres. So the candidate would choose which assessment centre they're going to be joining, and they then log in. But candidates wouldn't see that drop-down box. They would just go in because they're only normally invited to one assessment centre. So this is the candidate area. As with the facilitator view, it's designed to be very straightforward, quite intuitive, so that candidates don't need any training prior to the day. They don't need to access it. They can kind of come in and get the hang of things and how they work pretty quickly. You've got the option here for candidates to be able to share an image of themselves. You can either preload that if you have those photos and want to do that prior to the day, or you can ask candidates to upload an image. Some of our clients ask candidates to take a selfie on the day. It just makes it a little bit engaging, and it adds a little bit of fun to the day. If you don't want this feature, it can absolutely be switched off, so that won't even show up. Here you've got a little bit of welcome messaging. So this is different to what that initial welcome message was. This can be pre-done, and this is all completely customizable. It's just a little overview if you want to share some information with the candidate. So in terms of what the candidate can see and do, they get access to a welcome message. They get access to their schedule, so they can see what they're going to be doing throughout the day and at what time. You can see here that we've got an introduction section. So this one is actually grayed out, and we have grayed it out because that's actually going to be a non-assessed activity, whereas these purple ones are assessed activities. So the candidates can always know the difference. So if you've got various breaks that aren't assessed throughout the day, then they know that that's kind of a bit relaxing time for them. We haven't done a Skype link in the welcome room because what we did was we assigned that kind of welcome video that candidates were going to access, so they don't need to do a live Skype or Zoom or anything like that. But for the actual exercises, what we've done is we've assigned a Skype link with an interview room. So what you can do is you can do one of 2 ways, and I'll show you the different ways you can do it for different activities. But you can either pre-give candidates effectively a list of all of the different Skype links you'll have. So when they come in, they know that for my interview at 10:35, I need to go to virtual interview room 4, which on my list is Skype link 6. So they just then would click on Skype link 6 at 10:35 to start their interview. The other way you can do it is through that group exercise, which I'll show you through the messaging. So I can see here that my candidate has received the group activity message. I can see that I've got a new message because it shows up there, and I can also see that this one's unread because my envelope's closed. I can see what time I received that, and then I can then click on my group activity message. So depending on how you want to run your group activity, in this example, what we've done is we've set this up so it's similar to an email that a candidate might receive. It's designed like this to be able to sort of replicate a more realistic working scenario. So you can have whatever details you want in this area here, and then you've got this attachment here, which is sent through to the candidate, and then they've got this Zoom link. So this is the other way to do it with a candidate, rather than telling them what link they have to kind of click on. You can sort of get them to click on this Zoom link, and they'll know which link that is. So one of the things and one of the questions we have around delivering group activities on a virtual basis is, what about security of information? Absolutely, that's something that is really, really important to take into account. And what our recommendation is fundamentally, anytime you have these attached documentations, once a candidate clicks on that, that will effectively go into their download history. So they would be able to access that after the assessment centre. So our recommendation really is to include as much of the information in this body of the text as possible. And then any information you include in the attachments should be stuff that is not necessarily sensitive, or actually, if that candidate decided to share it with other candidates, it wouldn't make a difference if they knew that information before they arrived at the assessment centre. So that's sort of how candidates can receive the information. There's two ways in which a candidate can reply, and again, it depends on how you set out your activities. A candidate can either reply in the message, so they click on reply, they click this message, click send. That message will go on directly to the assessor that's been assigned to assess that candidate. And usually that's for potentially a shorter text response. If you're asking candidates to do a little bit more of an in-depth response, so for example, it might be during a case study activity where they have to produce a report, they can upload documents in this section here. So it can be in any format you want. It can be Word, Excel, anything like that. They just click on Browse, upload the file, and then they decide which activity that needs to be assigned against. So it might be case study, and then they submit that document. So that document then will, in the same way that that other message does, it goes directly to the assessor that's been assigned to assess that particular activity. So your assessors don't need to go around and sort of search through groups of files or anything like that to find their candidate's activity. They will only ever see the information that they need for their candidates that they're assessing. So that's basically it from a candidate perspective. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's designed not to be very complex. Candidates have enough to think about during the assessment centres, so there's not too much required of them in terms of technology here. So if I move back to the assessor side of things, so we've given the candidates their messages, log in. So I can see all of the list of the assessment centres that I've been assigned to assess. I'll click on the one that's most relevant. Impact, it has been designed to be very straightforward and not complex at all for assessors, so they don't require the training or anything like that up front. It is helpful sometimes if you do, and we always recommend a pilot just to kind of get people familiar with the technology and how it's working, but you cannot fundamentally have somebody show up on the day, and it's pretty straightforward. So you have information here that you can share with an assessor. It might be just a reminder. Here we've got use the full range of the scale of this rating scale. Remember to score candidates as you assess them throughout the day. It's just some little reminder information. If you have assessors that want to access information prior to the day, what you can do is effectively at the moment, when they click on an activity, they'll be able to go through and see the candidate details. In order to prevent that, all you need to do is turn the assessment centre offline. So assessors would still be able to kind of access this information in terms of they'd access this assessment centre, but what they wouldn't be able to do is access the candidate information, but they would be able to see all of their scoring guidelines and any other information you want them to see. So they can read up and do any revision they need prior to the assessment centre. Which is really, really handy. So it means you don't have to email them documentation separately. They can see it in this one platform. So if I go into assess, I'm going to assess this group exercise, and then assess is literally just click on the time or the block in your calendar. I can see here that this is my candidate. So actually, it's a group exercise. I've got 2 candidates to assess. I can see here that candidate, who's Beatrice, she has got her picture up there. Jamie hasn't got a picture at the moment. You've got here a little bit of text that you can add in there as well, and also the resources that you might want to share with the assessor. Sorry. So this could be your scoring guidelines and things like that. So all the assessor needs to do is just open that up, and that will open in a document for them. Now I can start assessing. What I can do is with Impact, it is actually dynamic in terms of you can change the screen size and the visual will change as well. So this is really handy if you're an assessor and you're wanting to kind of review candidates, but also see your screening guidelines. You can use Window is then effectively kind of see your guide, and you can kind of go through and are doing kind of that video link as well. You can have all of your video side of it on this side, on the left or the right, and then you can still be scoring your candidates as you go through. So it just makes it really easy for your assessors rather than having to flip through screens constantly. So if I go back into here, okay. So that brings me to the scoring side of things. So scoring is completely up to you guys in terms of what you score against, and that can all be set up in the kind of the admin and the setup side. So as an example, our criteria that we're scoring against is planning, communication, problem solving, and driver maturity. For each particular criteria, we've got indicators, so we've got negative and positive indicators. In this example and this scoring process, we have got the ability to be able to score each indicator, and then you give an overall score. We also have another version of the scoring system whereby it's not scored per indicator. It's literally just a tick box. So you would tick a negative or tick a positive indicator and then give an overall criteria score. Ticking these boxes doesn't automatically calculate this criteria score. It still allows your assessors to have a kind of their own autonomy when it comes to deciding what the overall score needs to be. It might be that you know, they've got obviously 2 4s and a 3. Depending on your guidelines, they might be guided to give the benefit of the doubt and score higher rather than lower, or it might be that you're asked to score relatively harshly, so they might get a 3 on that. But you kind of individual criteria, you would score based on that. Your notes can be kept here, so they might be your supporting evidence for the reason why you're going to be scoring that candidate that. As you go through though, you can actually keep sort of more broader notes. So these is really handy to have if you're, for example, in the middle of the interview. These might be where you would keep your general notes, and once you've kind of completed the interview, you can then sort of switch between your general notes and then only put in your supporting evidence into here as well. So from a candidate perspective, you can see here that the messages were sent through to me from Beatrice. So there's that reply message that Beatrice sent to me, so I can access that. If I'm also going to be getting a document, that document will also show up in here as well. So you've got access to that at all times. You can also access sort of a little bit of a summary of your candidate, so you can see how they've performed overall for this particular activity. This will have no relevance whatsoever in terms of any of the other activities that they've been scored against. It's only for this activity, and this is really, really handy and a really good visual representation to your assessors. Just in case you've got, you know, quite a number of criteria that you're scoring against, this will tell them straight away before they save and exit which ones they haven't yet scored, so they can go back in and make sure that for those criteria. You can, so if you've got a number of different criteria that you're scoring against, you can switch between the different criteria depending on. So once the assessor saves that, that's now live to a scoring grid. So the assessors can't see the scoring grid, the facilitators can't see the scoring grid, only the administrators can see the scoring grid. But what I'll do is I'll take you through to an example of what that looks like now. Again, if there's any questions, please let me know. Here's one I prepared a little bit earlier. So it looks like once it's been populated. Oh, not that one. Apologies. This one here. Sorry about that. That makes more sense. Right, so now we've got an example of kind of the candidate scores as they come through. So you can view candidate scores by different, so you can view them either by criteria or you can view them by activity, and it's just a case of kind of flicking through. What you can do is you can decide on a benchmark for the total score. So you can see our total scores are over on the right hand side, but it might be that we want to set a benchmark of 19 because we say actually that's the minimum we want any candidate to be able to score in order to be considered. So you can slide that across. What that will do is that removes any of your candidates who are not going to be eligible or considered due to their overall score. One of the good things about this is it's dynamic in that it is kind of changeable, so you can rank or order it depending on what's important. So it might be that actually you have your overall benchmark score, so it might be a 19 that candidates need to have, but actually you have a secondary requirement that all candidates must have a minimum of a 2 in communication. So we're going to rank those candidates now and order them by their score in communication. So I can see here Jamie White who got a 20 overall, who actually scored higher than Elsa. But ordinarily on the overall score, we might have considered Jamie first, but actually Jamie only scored a 2 in communication and Elsa scored a 3. So fundamentally what we're going to do is we're going to extend an offer to Elsa before we extend an offer to Jamie because he's not met that particular criteria. What you can do as well is you can view scores in a little bit more detail. So if I go into Alice's scores, I can see here that motivation has been made up of a score of 3 for her interview. If that score, that overall score of 3 is made up of more activities, so if we're assessing for motivations for the role in multiple activities, it will list those multiple activities and what their score was there. And then this overall score will be an average of those scores across the activities. I'll show you an example of what that looks like here. So if I pick this, you can see here that the overall score of 3 for the group exercise has been made up of this combination of scores. And what I can do as well is I can see the assessor comments if there are any as part of that. Now all of these scores can be exported, so you can either just copy it, which is effectively a screen print, export it by CSV, Excel or PDF. It's important to know though at this point that the exports will only ever export what is showing in this box. So if we reduce it down to 2 candidates in the box, then it will only export those 2 candidates. And that's designed to be kind of like a quick and easy showcase of the scores if you're needing to send them on to anybody. Now, you can get more in-depth exports. So I'll show you those just now. A number of different exports that you can have. There's schedule summary, which is effectively just an overview of your schedule for the day, and that's really handy from a facilitator perspective, and I'll just export one for you. This is helpful as just a guide, particularly when you've got candidates who are attending multiple schedules throughout the day with assessor with them at different times. We've enabled some macros which show you what that looks like, so you can it looks a lot better with interviews, case studies being done at separate times, the group exercise, all of the candidates are doing that at the same time, and then they swatch your case study and interview in the afternoon. What this is also really helpful to do is when you're actually setting up your assessment centre and you're creating your schedules, it allows you to sort of see if you've made any kind of errors anywhere. So this one here, I can see that I've actually put that in until 10:25 when actually it should be till 10:30, so I can go back in and change that quite easily. If I go back in to have a look at some of the other details, you can export what we call this Assessor Details report, which is fundamentally an overview of what assessor is going to be assessing which candidate for which activity in which room at what time. So it's a really easy overview for anybody who's going to be managing that assessment centre for the day, in case anybody comes to you and says, oh, what am I supposed to be doing? Which candidate am I supposed to be seeing? You know, anything like that, or which Zoom link am I supposed to be using? Makes it really straightforward and easy to manage. I'll show you an example of some of the scoring that you can get. So, oops, hang on. So if I click on the Get Candidate Scores, again, it's an Excel report that gets exported. And what that does is enables all of the candidate details to be shown. So what it will show is the activity name, what criteria name it is, the assessor name, the candidate name, and the candidate email. If I go into, and I think I should have, I may have, again, there we go. I'll try this one, which will show actuals. Apologies for that. Okay, here we go. That's better. Okay, so you can see the activity, what criteria they were scored against, who the assessor was, the candidate name. You can remove candidate email, it's not important. Then you have the overall score, and then you have any income from your assessors. This is really handy for doing feedbacks. You can filter the candidates. So if I want to just give feedback for Jamie, for example, I can then go through in really good detail for each individual activity, each individual criteria, the exact score that they got. What I can do as well is I can export the indicator scores as well. So if you're wanting to go into even further detail with the candidates, you can export each individual positive and negative indicator for each individual criteria. So it goes into some quite in-depth data that you can analyze there. If you're wanting to as well, rather than just those criteria notes that you saw, you can actually export all of the assessor notes. So that's those kind of the general notes that those assessors have been taking throughout the activities. And you can use those if there's any queries around decisions or anything like that. So it's pretty straightforward from that side of things. If I go back to the assessment centre, so this is the list of all of the assessment centres that you've created. You can, once the assessment centre has been finished or finalised, once you've exported any of the data that you need, any of the scores that you need, you put them into your HR system or ATS, you can actually delete them and kind of keep things a little bit tidier if you have no use for them anymore. So you can see here on the right hand side that I've got a number of different options in terms of functionality. So I've got this button here which turns the assessment centre on and off. So this is really, really important if you've got, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, you've got assessors who want to access the system beforehand, see any of their scoring guidelines or any information they need to see. Whilst these are on red, those assessors won't be able to access candidate information. They won't be able to see who they're assessing. Once you turn that green, then those assessors can go in exactly as I showed you. It's also really helpful from a candidate side of things. So once you turn this off after the assessment centre's finished, candidates won't be able to go back in and access any of that information that you've kind of shared with them around the activities, unless of course it's something they've downloaded, but any of those messages that they've received, they won't be able to kind of access that. So that's really helpful from a data security perspective. This little button here sets up fields. So we've got kind of basic fields which tend to be for an assessor. It might be I think it's their name and email address. You can set up further fields, and it really depends on exactly what field you're wanting to assign. It might be a line of service. It might be a what university they went to. It could be anything, and it can be assigned to You might want to add in a field for your activities in terms of the requirements for like either technology or for equipment. Particularly if you're doing a face-to-face, you might require like a projector for a case study or an interview or anything like that, so you can set those fields there. This button here is your cloning button. So the cloning button, which is probably one of the best features of Impact, once you've set up your assessment center to start with, which does take a little bit of time because you're having to set up all of your activities and the criteria and everything like that and your schedules. But once you've done that initial setup, any assessment center that you're wanting to run thereon, if it's the same assessment center or following a similar structure to the assessment center you've already created, all you do is press clone. So if I want to clone that center, if we're using the same rooms again, I can choose that. I can click down, choose whichever elements I'm wanting to copy across. The only thing that it won't allow you to copy it across or doesn't give you an option to is the candidates. And normally that's because you don't have candidates going to multiple assessment centers. So it just requires you to upload your candidates at each new assessment center. So I just click on the clone button, and you can see here I've now got an example, that clone of that previous assessment center. So once that clone's been done, I can do any editing to that assessment center I want. So I can go in, I can change criteria. This is what you set sort of at the start. You set your own scoring criteria, add in, adjust any of these welcome messages, anything like that. It might be that you're running a similar assessment center, but actually it's not completely like for like. So it might be that you've decided not to run the group exercise for this coming one, so you can just delete that and remove it out. It might be that you're wanting to assess against slightly different criteria because it's a slightly different role, so you can just adjust that. But fundamentally, everything is the same. As I mentioned, the only thing that's not the same is the candidates. What you can do anytime you see any of this sort of icon here, it allows you to import candidates on bulk. So you can just do an export from your ATS or your HR system, and it's normally all you need is a candidate name and an email address, and then you can bulk upload those candidates to the assessment center. For the assessors, very simply, what you would tend to have are so anybody, it might be your entire pool of assessors that have been assigned or chosen to be an assessor at any one of your assessment centres. But what you can do is you can do a drag and drop scenario for this particular assessment centre, so you can choose which out of your pool of assessors you'll use for this particular one. You'll notice throughout Impact it is designed to be pretty straightforward, so it's a bit of a drag and drop scenario. This was originally designed to be really compatible with tablets, so you'll see that's why the styling is the way that it is, so everything can kind of be done on a tablet, doesn't need to be done through a laptop. So I'm going to show you an example of one of the other things apart from the cloning, which you've already seen, is actually the ability to be able to schedule an assessment centre really. I've got here my criteria, my rooms are done. I've got my lists that we saw before. I've got all my assessors that I've assigned that I know are going to be attending the assessment centre. And what I've done is I've also set up my schedules. Schedule 1, I've set it up here, so these are my timings. Again, like anything, what you would normally do when you're setting up your assessment centre is your available activities will be over the left-hand side, and you sort of just drag and drop them across. So you set the timings for those however you want. At the moment, I haven't got any candidates that are going to be that I've scheduled to be part of this particular schedule. You can do a manual allocation of candidates. So this is particularly helpful if you've got, for example, a couple of candidates who may be needing to have reasonable adjustments. So it might be that they're needing to have extra time in their schedules. So you can manually select those candidates that are going to be assigned to that particular assessment centre. What you can do alternatively as well is you can do a kind of an automatic distribution of candidates, which I'll show you shortly. One of the functions as well here is you've got the ability to be able to check or uncheck this match assessor once function. So what that will do if it's checked, it means that an assessor will only ever see a candidate at one time during the whole of the assessment centre. So again, it helps with that reduction of that unconscious bias and that halo and horns effects scenario. So they'll only ever be able to really see an assessor candidate based on what they've seen at that one activity. So if I go back to show you this automatically to your various different schedules. So in this example, I've got two schedules that they can choose from. All I do is click on distribute candidates to schedules. What I've done as well is I've assigned candidates with a line of service. So what this will allow me to do is I can either spread candidates across the various different schedules, or I can decide to group them together. So I might want to have all of my candidates for HR on the same schedule, and I might want to have all of my candidates for IT on the same schedule. So I can group them together, and therefore they'll automatically be grouped in that way. So if I go back and show you what that schedule looks like, you can see now that they're grouped together. So they're all grouped together because of the line of service that they've attended. It might be, for example, in this instance, that you group them by their location that they're applying for, or for whatever reason you might want to group candidates, you can do that automatically. So if we go through now to have a look at the actual schedulings, it's very straightforward. You can either auto schedule each individual schedule, or you can auto schedule all. You just click on the button, and there we go. So that's done. This warning that's shown up is a warning that I expect to see. As I mentioned earlier, we created that introduction activity, but I made it a non-assessed activity. So this is telling me it can't assign any assessors, but there's no assessor requirement for the activity introduction. So I expect to see that, and that's absolutely fine. What it will do is it will show up with red warnings. So red warnings are things that mean that your assessment centre won't be able to run without it being fixed. So it might be that you, for some reason, haven't got enough rooms, or you actually don't have enough assessors for the activities that you're wanting to run, or something's up with your candidates and they're not being assigned correctly, or they don't have a line of service even though you've made a requirement for them to have that. So it allows you to go back in and update any of those settings that you have for those assessment centres, which means that on the day you're left with no surprises, which I think I've certainly attended assessment centres where there's been things on the day where you think you may have booked a room and it's not been booked, or you think you've assigned activities to a room and they've not been assigned. So it's quite helpful from that side of things. If I could click on any of the candidates, I can see activities they've been assigned to do at what times. So I can see their schedules for the day, and the same goes with the assessors. I can see their assessors for the day. Great feature on the scheduling side of things is this rules function. So you can create rules that are anything. So any of that metadata, or those fields that I said earlier, you can create rules based on those fields. So we've created a rule here for our candidates to say, our assessors and candidates, to say that the assessor line of service has to equal the candidate field line of service. We've made that mandatory. If you were to uncheck that box, the system would automatically kind of try and follow that rule. But where you had it, for example, where you didn't have enough assessors that had the same line of service as your candidate, you could uncheck that, and it would mean that it wouldn't necessarily come up as a red warning. It might come up as a yellow warning instead. For face-to-face assessment centres, this activity in room rules is really good. So you might have an activity feature such as it might have equipment like a projector. So you need a projector for the case study activity, and you'll assign and say that a room has a particular feature such as a projector. So the automatic scheduling will always put in the case study activity only in a room that has a projector that matches that feature. You can do not equals as well, so you can do sort of a bunch of different things. An example of where you have an activity and an assessor rule, it could be that you have an assessor that hasn't been trained to assess a particular activity. So you might want to make it so that that assessor could only ever be assigned to assess group exercises or case studies or interviews or whatever it is that they can assess. So it will automatically make sure that that rule's adhered to. So just when there's, oh, I've got a question. So let me just have a look at that. Right, so I've got a question that says, can you have more than one activity in the schedule at the same time? So you can't have more than one activity in one schedule, but what you would do is you would run multiple schedules. As I said earlier, so you would have, so you saw on the example, I've closed that box now, you saw in the example that you have, for example, the case study and the interviews being run at the same time. So they're just done that way by running multiple schedules. And you can run basically as many schedules as you like. We've got one client that runs, I think, 8 schedules in one day. And all of the activities are all done at different times, and it doesn't have to be that all activities start at 10 o'clock. You can have one activity starting at 10 and one starting at 10:15 and everything like that. It just really depends on how complex your assessment centres are. But fundamentally, whatever you do kind of in person and however you do that, it can be run via this digital platform. So one of the other things to kind of show, again, looking at the resources and message template. So this is fundamentally where you would store all of your resources that you'll share with either your candidates, your assessors, or your facilitators. And then these are those message templates. So anytime you want to create something new throughout the system, you'll see these kind of, I'll click plus on that. You can create your message template. You then decide what attachment you're going to attach, if you're going to have a link, and then you decide which associated activity that's going to be attached to. Target audience is going to be for that resource. So for example, here, this example case study is the assessor information. So what you do when you're uploading that is you'll put your target as your assessor. So the assessor is the only person that's going to be able to see that information. So it would never be able to be accidentally sent to a candidate, because it would never kind of be an option for a facilitator to send that information to. There's that security from that side of things. Whilst I'm on here, to mention as well, although you've got the automated scheduling function, what you can do a manual override. So for any of your activities, it might be that, for example, you have an assessor that draws a day of. So you can change the assessor from that activity and then choosing a different assessor to kind of go in their place. It might be that you have, so actually they're not being replaced on the day, but you want to remove that candidate from that assessor's schedule. So you just remove that candidate, and that will automatically update that assessor's schedule live. So you don't have to worry about kind of rerunning or doing anything like that. It will do that and update it live. So that's quite helpful from that side of things. So that's basically it. I've kind of gone through those, and there's various other and things like that, but in the interest of time, I've kind of gone through the main features of it. Are there any other questions that anybody has at the moment? That I just to kind of have a think about anything. The main concept in terms of it being paperless is it allows for assessors, and it was designed for assessors to be able to do remote scoring and remote assessing, and that is really what makes it really suitable for a virtual environment. The ability to just be able to kind of go online, all of the scoring as it's loaded, it gets loaded live. You reduce the ability for assessors to be able to have any kind of unconscious bias when it comes to candidate performance, because they can't actually see what the candidates have scored for other assessments. And so from that side of it, it's really, really handy. When you've got the virtual element to it, it means that everything is kind of done from one central platform. So the candidates, for them, everything is delivered to them in the one place. They don't have to go into their email address and then click on information there and then have to go into something separate and then find information there. Everything's kind of done through the one central system. So it makes the experience for them a lot better as well, which we know is particularly important, especially when, you know, the assessment centres that tend to be that final stage that we're assessing candidates, but also the final stage where a candidate might be assessing you as an organisation. So at that point, the experience is particularly important to them. It can also be a little bit of a reflection of what we look at in the new world of remote working. So, you know, it might be that actually, as an organisation following on from COVID-19, remote working is going to become a bit more part of a normal day. So there isn't anything wrong with a candidate having to do a group activity over a Skype or a Zoom meeting, because potentially that's how they'll be working when they're having to do a project. So it can kind of help show what the reality of working life might be for them moving forward. Right, so I've got another question here. Question is, how does the annual license, or how does the costing work, licenses or annual charge? So the pricing works normally, so we would generally have an initial setup cost. So that is the setup cost, which is year one, and that involves us kind of setting up the account and doing the training and doing the bits and pieces that we need to do to get you set up. And then it's based on an annual license charge. So your annual license charge is always based on kind of volumes. So if you have higher volumes, you do find economies of scale, but we would always work with you to understand what that looks like. At the moment, during the COVID-19 crisis, we're actually offering the license fee free of charge. So if you are interested, then do get in touch with us and let us know, and we can certainly have that conversation with you as to what that could look like. It's a great opportunity at the moment, certainly, to be able to utilise and introduce and test this kind of technology and see what that might look like moving forward. I've got another question here. So if there are several assessors, is there the option that the assessor can only see the scores of the candidates they're assessing to ensure confidentiality? Yes, so assessors would only ever see and score the candidate that they're assessing. If there's multiple assessors assessing one candidate, they wouldn't see the score that the other assessor has scored that candidate. It would only show up in that wash-up grid. So it means, again, they can't be influenced by what another assessor is scoring them for that particular assessment. Hopefully that's answered your question. And then I've got another one, which is, can assessors see the CV of the candidates prior to the assessment centre through Impact? So the answer to that is, at the moment, no. Ideally, and our recommendation is to, again, have a think about the requirement for an assessor to see a CV. We always advocate, certainly from a best practice perspective, that if a candidate has met certain requirements throughout the assessment process, we do sometimes sort of just say to organisations, maybe it's worthwhile thinking about what a CV adds to an assessment, particularly at the assessment centre stage. If assessors have seen a CV prior to the assessment centre, does that increase the possibility of having some kind of predetermined idea of what a candidate might be or how they might perform based on their CV? So those sorts of questions are always raised, and it's one of the reasons why it's not a functionality currently on Impact. If you did want to share CVs, then that's something you might want to share sort of via email directly with those assessors, but not currently sort of through Impact. Perfect. So as I mentioned, we've got quite a few questions here, which is great. We've got the offer at the moment, which is the free use of the technology, and hopefully this has been helpful for you guys to see how it works and how it could work, not only for now and sort of supporting the virtual environment at the moment, but certainly moving forward in terms of how you can transform your assessment centres and still deliver if you're wanting to, or from a face-to-face perspective, but actually considering when things go back to normal, virtual assessment centres could become very much more commonplace. If you do have any questions following today, please do let us know. You can reach us either at hello@weareamberjack.com. You can email me directly if you want. It's carlin.summers@weareamberjack.com. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and hopefully we will speak to you soon. Many thanks.